Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for coming out on this beautiful sunny day on Nantucket. Our guest tonight traveled from Vermont or Connecticut?
Vermont to Connecticut to the island.
So hop, skipped, and jumped all the way to Nantucket in this beautiful winter weather. And as an expert in parenting strategies for teenagers, it is probably clear to all of you who have, I'm guessing, experience with parenting teenagers that this is not for the faint of heart. So the fact that she could travel all this way, she's in the right place with the right group of us. Diana Clark is the family outreach specialist at Turnbridge, which is an addiction and co-occurring treatment center for young people in Connecticut. She has authored several workshops for parents, and she has one print book and one audiobook. She has a master's in psychology from Antioch, New England Graduate School, and has worked previously as a labor attorney. Yes.
Got it.
So she's going to talk to us tonight about these challenging and fun and maybe a little more challenging teenage years. I want to ask everyone now, before we get started, one little housekeeping item is to turn off or silence your cell phones. And for your awareness, we're video recording the presentation. We will not video record the question and answer session at the end, so that won't be broadcast. But we are hoping to broadcast this on NCTV or have it on YouTube and on our website, so that those of you who couldn't make it get to enjoy the presentation also. So
Great.
Without further ado, Diana Clark.
Thank you. I can say, as the mother of a 17-year-old, that it makes my heart just race to hear myself described as a parenting expert, because he would argue with that so voraciously right now. But really, I am an expert. If I am an expert at anything, it is with young adults and teenagers and substance use disorders. And so I've taken that information and I've backed it up. What could we do as parents in the beginning of those years that may alter? What I've found is not a whole lot. I want you to know that. There isn't a whole lot to prevent addiction. But there are some parenting strategies that we can employ that will increase potentially the odds that they may not wind up in the program like the one I work at. So, the parenting dance, it is constant. In one ear, the other ear, either we're doing too much or we're doing too little. There's too much social media or not enough. We're giving them too much money or not enough money, depending on who you talk to. Too much independence or not enough. We're protecting them too much or not quite enough. It is constant, and we're being barraged by social media, and we're seeing it on TV. And depending upon which station you listen to, you hear a different point of view. So, parenting in 2019 is vastly different than it was in the last 60 years ago, 50 years ago. Prior to the last half of the 20th century, it was up to kids to prove their value and their worth to parents. Right? For those of you who are as old as I am, that was true. Being a good parent today means being sensitive to our kids' complaints that would have been unheard of generations ago. My parents were fabulous parents, but never once did they tilt their head and look at me across the dinner table and say, "Are you happy?" It just didn't happen. It didn't happen, but it happens now. When kids are born and you ask moms any question, they say, "I don't care what they do. I don't care what they are. All I care about is that they're happy." How many of us have said that? Me. Guys, happy is so elusive to all of us, let alone a teenager, that I want us to take happy off the table. Let's make functional and productive the goal. Happy can be the byproduct. But when kids have the leverage to say, "I'm not happy," and we start dancing, it becomes problematic. So, again, wanting our kids to be personally fulfilled is a goal unique to our generation. having gone to extraordinary lengths to provide it, kids sometimes grow up believing it is our responsibility to continue to do so. So, what do we hope? We hope for the perfect family when we start out raising children. We do. We hope for that. What we get is not that. We just don't. Nobody does. We get that. Because what's normal in teenage years looks an awful lot like crazy later on, all right? Impulsive, shocking dress, moody and overly sensitive, misinterpreting your messages, messy rooms, lockers, all of those things. Those are considered normal behaviors, normal. Alcohol, drug use in our culture falls in the normal, average, regular. I don't think it should, but it does. What the quest for independence looks like, it's moody, it's messy, increased focus on self, alternating between high expectations and poor self-esteem. Moodiness again, improved ability to use speech to express oneself. Arguing with somebody who is in their later teenage years is like battling Clarence Darrow at his best. They're good. They now have the capacity to rally all of that intellect and force and direct it right at you. Resistance to following parents' belief system or cultural traditions is part of the process in our culture. Why normal looks a little crazy. The adolescent brain is built to seek novelty, to take risk, to engage with their peers and reject adults, for increased emotional intensity and creative exploration that may lead to existential angst, but ultimately can lead to perceiving new solutions. So this is what their brains are doing. They're built big and broad, and they're getting new neural networks all the time, and I'm going to do a little exercise about that in a minute. And part of what happens in teenage years is that the neurons start pruning, okay? So all of these experiences they've had through childhood are all part of this big tree of neural networks. And during adolescence, what they use more, what they use becomes growing, and what they stop using gets pruned, okay? So I think of it like bonsai trimming. Big engine, poor driving skills, faulty brakes, and high-octane gas. That's the teenage brain and hormone system. Big engine, big brain, poor driving skills, the result of reconstruction of the prefrontal cortex, and we're going to talk about that in a second. Faulty brakes, the lack of impulse control, and high-octane gas increase emotions following and attendant with hormonal changes. So, parenting tip, surviving the normal teen issues. Pick your battles. Set clear rules about substance use and have clear, identifiable consequences for violating them. It doesn't have to be a huge war, but you need to spell it out. Be tolerant of misadventure, but make sure you talk about the mistakes. Many parents that I know of just say, well, it was such a little thing, so they don't address it. Don't be shocked when they do or say something stupid. It is part of it. Emphasize the positive things in their lives, encourage new healthy activities, encourage independence, and be as approachable as possible, even when they seem impossible. I was reading an article in the New York Times that what teens really want is houseplant parents. Anybody else read this article? It was a couple of years ago, and I was planted on the couch, frankly, reading the Sunday paper. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, I have found my mission. I am now a houseplant parent, okay? I am there when my son needs advice. I am there on the couch at various intervals, available, but I'm not tracking him down anymore. I'm a houseplant parent. So, there are dangerous teenage trends, and when I was just Googling some of them, I was like, wow, what is this? Purple drank, adding cough syrup to codeine to a soft drink and candy, usually Sprite and Jolly Ranchers, get high. dripping, a potentially dangerous new vaping method called dripping, dropping e-cigarette liquid directly on hot coals to get a bigger buzz. Vodka eyeballing. I've had kids come into treatment who were getting their alcohol through putting it through their eyeballs because it doesn't show up on a breathalyzer. They're clever. Tampons. The body absorbs alcohol in a variety of locations. Unsupervised Uber, I'm amazed when I go into cities. I'm amazed. I'm a country girl. I live in rural Vermont, and we don't even have Uber. So when I hear that teen kids are allowed to just get in cars with Uber drivers, I'm always like, but what if the Uber driver isn't safe? And we've had people leave our treatment program via Uber and wind up smoking weed in the Uber on the way back to wherever they were heading. Juice cleanses, changing definitions of what sex is. Sex used to include a whole lot of things when I was young. It includes very little things now, like intercourse is now sex. Other things aren't sex anymore. I'm shocked by that. So, the role of the prefrontal cortex. Have all of you guys had this? So the prefrontal cortex, responsible for planning, impulse control, moral compass, all of the things that we would ascribe to an adult brain. The ability to make and plan a decision and control an impulse that is opposite to the plan. That's an adult brain. When somebody becomes addicted to a substance, that part of the brain stops developing. It becomes hijacked. So somebody with a substance use disorder's brain might sound a little like this. Go ahead, steal the necklace. She never wears it anyway. You can drink and drive. Drunk driving laws, those are for amateurs. You're a pro. Like the old angel and devil on the shoulders, they didn't have an angel mask, so I am forced to use Mary Poppins. Yoo-hoo, says the prefrontal cortex. You drink and drive, you might hurt somebody other than yourself. If you steal from your mother, she may never trust you again. It's like those old cartoons. When somebody has a substance use disorder, it isn't that they don't have this voice anymore. It's just that this one is louder during the course of craving. And applying that to a normal teen, it is get the paper from a friend. Go ahead, get the paper. The teacher will never find out. And the prefrontal cortex is the voice that would say, you know, if you get caught cheating or plagiarizing, you may not get to go to college. Those are the competing voices. And the more this part of the brain is exercised, the more it grows. So we're going to talk about that in just a minute, because brain cells are called neurons. And any neuroscientists in the room? Awesome. Okay, now I can go to town. I don't understand that much, but I understand enough to be helpful. The two concepts I want to focus on are fire together, wire together, and use it or lose it. So let's imagine, we'll use my son, for example. My 17-year-old goes to a party and he smokes weed and he feels more comfortable. He's more relaxed. He feels better looking. He's charming all of a sudden. Something in his brain lights up and says, remember this. And the next time he thought about that moment, he didn't even have to repeat the doing of the pot. The doing of the pot, he would howl if he heard that right now. He wouldn't have to repeat the smoking of the weed in order for neurons to change and his brain to change. So, one neuron's lit up, that feels good. The next time he thought about that moment, another neuron basically lights up and it connects to the last one. Fire together, wire together. And when somebody has a substance use disorder, what are they thinking about? Getting drugs, using drugs, getting away with it, getting the money for it, avoiding treatment for it. There's a whole lot of thought that goes into a substance use disorder. And every time they're thinking about it, they're changing their brain and they're developing this neural network. That's the bad news. The good news, unless that neural network is growing something positive, If they're focusing on algebra equations and they're looking at the math all the time, they're developing a different neural network. Fire together, wire together. Our brains are shaped by what we think about. It's like the Native American story of two wolves. The brave says to the elder, "Grandfather, I've got two wolves in my head, one that is mean and angry and jealous and nasty, and one that is kind and generous and loving. And what I want to know, Grandfather, is which wolf lives?" And the elder says, after a pause, because all elders pause, says, "The one you feed." And that is true for neuroscience. That is completely the way the brain works. The one neural network we focus on is the one that is emphasized in the brain and grows. So in the case of a substance use disorder, that becomes the substance use neural network. For somebody else, it might be something else. So the other concept is use it or lose it. I am old. I can't even look at an algebraic equation and think math. I see letters and that I'm just trying to make a sentence out of algebra, right? It's gone. If I ever had it, it's gone. I didn't use it, I lost it. And that is true for them as well. The story of addiction is that they have this neural network of substance using, and when they stop thinking of using substances and start thinking about something else, the original neural network shrinks and a new neural network grows. I think that's just miraculous. I really do. And that is the basis of real change. When the neural network, it isn't just, I want to be different. It takes a lot of thought and a lot of action that goes consistent with a lot of thought in order to change. And it takes a long time. It takes a minimum of 4 months to begin a new neural network. And it really is about a year for it to firmly embed. So if we're going to really pick up a new way of being in life, we've got to commit to it for a very sustained period of time. And we know that from diets. We know that from exercise bicycles that are sitting in the storage room. We know that from other things. So, case study. Until last month, Jackson, age 16, had always been an easy kid. He'd been on course to gain acceptance to college. The change seemed to coincide with a new relationship with his first love, Jessica. Now he refuses to talk to his parents. He spends endless numbers of hours on the phone with her, and his attitudes about school, politics, and friendships have changed 180 degrees. He has become forgetful and short-tempered. His grades are dropping from A's to C's. When questioned by his parents, Jackson replies, "A's are elitist. I am happy with C's." What to do? What could be the problem? So it could be a whole host of things. It could be mental illness. It could just simply be that he was refusing to be part of the pressure cooker that current scholastic life entails. But it could also be the sign that A, he is not in something healthy. A drop in grades that dramatically is a sign of something. It is. Now, I'm not going to say it's a sign of drug addiction, but it is a sign that something has shifted. So, again, we've already done that one. Praise and grit. There is this new parenting technique that started in the 80s, along with self-esteem studies and self-esteem programming in schools, where kids were praised for just about everything. I remember when my son was born, I was an older mom, and my husband, even older than I was, when he was toilet trained, he said, "You know, you're making such a big deal about this. It's like you want to throw a parade every time he hits the bin." And I'm like, "Yeah, but praise helps." He said, "I don't buy it. I don't buy it." And he was right. What builds confidence in kids is working hard at something and seeing that something real is accomplished, even if it's partially a failure. Confidence comes from making an effort, from persevering and coping and seeing the results. So as a parent, you're better off praising something that is difficult and requires effort than something about winning. You're better off praising the coping than the result. So, college readiness considerations. I can't come to a parent presentation without discussing this, all right? I have a son getting ready to go off to college. I can't honestly answer all of these in the way I would like to. Does it mean he's not getting to go? No. It just means that he's got his work cut out for him because I haven't prepped him as well as I possibly could. And the questions, do they wake up with their own alarm system? If a knock on the door is his own alarm system, then the answer would be yes. Do they understand the benefits of a well-balanced life? So not in my house, sleeping, eating, and relaxing, not balanced. Do they meet the current school obligations in a timely fashion? Yes, that one I can say yes. Are they able to navigate stress, pain, and disappointment without having events derail them? Sometimes. Do they accept responsibility for their actions and don't blame others for their mistakes? Sometimes. Do they understand that all behavior has consequences, both bad and good? Are they able to talk about uncomfortable feelings? Do they have experience in self-discipline? That should be a different bullet, to live within a budget. I just got a call today from a company called TrueLink, which is a credit card. And this isn't an ad for them, but you can dictate exactly which expenditures your kids can make with this particular card. You can say where it's available for them to use, where it's not available. And I just thought for somebody in recovery, it's really important to have access to resources without having necessarily access to cash early on. Do they have the capacity to ask for and accept advice? Huge skill. And the hardest one, do I want college more than they do? If the answer to the last one is yes, then we need to take a step back. So let's talk about entitlement for just a few minutes. You guys are the winter people. I get that. But I am not talking about economically advantaged. I am talking about entitlement as a set of expectations that the world will treat us special, will provide for us, and rescue us without corollary accountability or responsibility. That is the definition of entitlement. So, in a series of studies using surveys that measure psychological entitlement and narcissism, they are finding that Generation Y respondents scored 25% higher than respondents ages 40 to 60 and 50% higher than those 61 or over on those traits of narcissism. Just happening. Our culture is much more self-focused, much more about me. 60 years ago, you did not hear the expression self-care. It just wasn't there, but now it's everywhere. What is your self-care routine? So entitlement is problematic in that it creates both dysfunction and resistance to care. So somebody with an entitlement issue lacks coping skills because they have difficulty managing their emotions, lack experience in handling life because they won't get advice, expect immediate gratification, tend to be isolated, minimize behaviors. Entitlement cripples the ability to fail well and hampers the ability to learn and grow from failure. And what are the things that teach us in life? What are those things? What kind of experiences? Pain, mistakes, pain. And it is essential that we learn from it. So, what I am seeing in the work I'm doing is that entitlement is one of those things that kids are medicating. The lack of coping strategies, I know it makes me really uncomfortable too, the lack of coping strategies that are developing from entitlement are actually the propellant to medicate. The discrepancy between what the young adult feels and what the world is telling him creates pain. The consequences cause pain and lack strategies to cope. They seek immediate relief because instant gratification takes too long, and drugs and alcohol are an obvious answer to medicate pain. So, the teenage years, what's not normal? 20% of youth ages 13 to 18 live with a mental health condition. 11% of youth have a mood disorder. 10% of youth have a behavior or conduct disorder. 8% of youth have an anxiety disorder, and actually that is going up by the second. The recording of anxiety disorders is skyrocketing right now, skyrocketing. The sense of being overwhelmed is skyrocketing. Suicide is the third leading cause of death for ages 10 to 24. Approximately 24 million people of all ages and genders suffer with eating disorders, and eating disorders have the highest mortality rate of any mental illness. So, behavioral health statistics. 22% of young adults ages 18 to 25 with family incomes of $75,000 or more meet the criteria for dependence or abuse. That is 10%. It's almost double the national average. Marijuana contributes to psychosis and schizophrenia and reduces IQ. This is being definitely argued right now in both sides. This was information I got from SMART, which is about smart use of marijuana. The number of fatal overdoses from anxiety drugs in the United States quadrupled between 96 and 2013. Opioid crisis now the leading cause of accidental death. By the time high school athletes become seniors, approximately 11% of them will have used a narcotic pain reliever recreationally. Early experimentation with substances increases the odds that they will have a substance use disorder later. I have this chart on my refrigerator at home with that sign on there, Teen Brain under construction. And now that we're at 17, I was crossing off all of the ages up till that point. I'm not going to make it to 18. The difference is radical. Age 13, if somebody starts experimenting with alcohol and drinking at age 13, which is not uncommon, they have a 47% chance of having a substance use disorder later. If they wait till 21, it goes down to 9%. Why is that? Because the prefrontal cortex, the stop sign of the brain, is developed. Parenting tip. Recent research is definitely showing that teens give a hoot what we say. They just act like they don't. They care. They will not tell you this fact. They will never admit this fact. It's not within their DNA. Repetition of expectations is good for them. Every time my son walked out the door to go socialize, every time it was like, no weed, no alcohol, no heroin, no fentanyl, no cocaine, no crack. I mean, it became sort of humorous, but it wasn't. It was like, these are the expectations. I know you're going out, but these are the expectations. And the other expectation is, and if you're not able to do one of those things and you need a ride home, you call me. So we're walking that tightrope all the time between wanting somebody to be able to feel free to call us, so the consequence can't be so outsized that they would never call us, and set a limit. And it's a daily sort of dance. It's a daily dance. I wish I had the secret sauce to tell you what to do. But what I know is the more we talk to them about it, the more we go on websites like Faces of Meth. Has anybody gone on that website? It's gruesome to see what happens to a face in the span of a year with the methamphetamine addiction. And methamphetamine is coming. It is making a huge comeback, huge. Privilege, unfortunately, also doesn't lower risk of substance use disorders. Madeline Arthur Levine notes in her book, The Price of Privilege, that in spite of advantages, affluent teens experience the highest rates of depression, substance use, anxiety disorders, complaints, and unhappiness of any group in this country. The federal government responsible for tracking statistics found that wealthy suburbs had much higher substance use disorder than inner city, much higher. So, red flag behavior, when to get concerned. Significant decrease in school performance, strong resistance to attending school or absenteeism, problems with memory, attention, or concentration, big changes in energy level, physical symptoms, stomach aches, headaches, backaches, nosebleeds, seizures. I hope none of us would ignore a seizure, but some of the others are easy to ignore, and we can't. Feelings of hopelessness that last more than a 24-hour period. You know, look at it over a span of a couple of weeks. Substance abuse, slurred speech, thrill-seeking behavior, paranoid and overly suspicious, and sees or hears things that others do not. What do? We find out that our loved one really is hearing a different voice, or really is depressed, or spiraling with anxiety, because it's happening. Seek professional help. Set a quiet time and place to talk. Don't do it while you're rushing out the door. I'm a huge fan of being in the car during some of those conversations. People can't run away. You're not actually staring at one another. You don't even have to be driving. Just be in the car. Be prepared for anger and denial. Don't expect insight or buy-in. You guys are the parents. Remind a teen that there will be life there when they're healthy. If they need support and they need to be hospitalized or they need to be in a treatment program, and what we're thinking is, but the school dance is 2 weeks away because that's what seems important to them, we need to really evaluate, is that critical? That balancing act. Exaggeration or deepening of a teenager's mood swings, particularly anger, sadness, or irritability that lasts longer than 2 weeks, is a clue that you may want professional involvement, particularly if it's coupled with sleep changes, eating changes, taking more risks, and absence from their previous extracurricular activities. What could be the problem? Active addiction, mental health issue, just plain substance abuse, eating disorder. Eating disorders limit the oxygen to the brain. They become foggy. They become spacey. Trauma, untreated mental illness. Why do we get stuck when we get concerned? Because we do get stuck. Conflict is too scary. He gets aggressive. He punches holes in the walls when I raise a tricky issue. My son won't be able to go to college if I seek psychiatric help. I was working with a family whose son desperately wanted to go to West Point and felt like if he went to a psychiatrist, he would never be able to be allowed. And that was potentially true. I couldn't say, I know for a fact that's false. They go to my ex's house where the rules are more relaxed. I don't want to be the big heavy while my ex-partner gets to be the fun guy. Family members will judge my child. He isn't as bad as that guy. He will get worse if he goes away. My daughter will be embarrassed if we bring this up. He'll just shut down and I'll lose his trust. We need to talk. If there's one thing that we can do that actually increases resiliency in kids, is connection. And it might be 2 minutes a week, but it's genuine and it's not about did you do your homework or make your bed or shovel the snow. It is a connection. So I like to think, And many experts in this field think of all addiction as born of pain, that it is a way of medicating pain. And for a while, it does work. For a while, it works. But the problem, among other health risks, is you start relying on that one coping strategy. You have a bad day? What takes it away? I'll take a hit of weed. I'll do some pot. Want to celebrate? Another. It becomes the only coping strategy. And what are they medicating? They might be medicating physical pain or a psychiatric disorder or social discomfort or pain resulting from a trauma. There's a myriad of reasons why people use substances. But I think we also need to acknowledge that for some, it's an expression of risk and excitement. Those kids who ski over the tips of their skis, as a Vermonter, I see them, without their helmets on, and I'm like, whoa, that's a risk-taking kid. And substances fuel the need and the expression of risk. Bonding, you don't have to be a star athlete or an academic genius to find a peer group if you're willing to do substances. And there is a physical pleasure element to it. I love this quote. This is by James Brown, not Get Down James Brown, but a different James Brown. Drunk, you find yourself smarter and funnier and stronger and braver and even better looking. For a budding alcoholic, booze seems to do more for you than it does the others, and your only regret is that you didn't come across this miracle potion sooner. I love that. So we've got this prefrontal cortex that's been hijacked. The stop sign of the brain isn't working. There are payoffs for use. We live in a drug culture. You can't drive down the roads in states that allow billboards without seeing ads for alcohol and now ads for weed. You can't drive down the roads without seeing it. It's in our face. I was looking through a Crate and Barrel catalog a couple of years ago, and on almost every furniture page, there was a glass of wine or a beer or a cocktail. It is our culture. We punctuate almost all events with alcohol, and we try to address all pain through medication. We live in a drug culture. There's personality adaptation. Kids who start diving deeply into substance, you lose their non-using peers. There is something called addictive denial. The brain tells them it's not happening. And we also engage in denial. Addiction is like a magic act. If it says, look over here, it's the school's problem why I'm getting bad grades. It is my girlfriend, my boyfriend, your problem. It is somebody else's problem or issue. When in fact, when you focus on the person who's really struggling, it's like the wizard behind the screen. So, what heals the brain? What changes the brain? Time and focus. In the case of a substance use disorder, it takes 12 to 18 months to begin to really change. They're talking about early recovery being 5 years. Abstinence, and I'm talking about abstinence from all euphoria-creating substances. I'm not talking about SSRIs or any other psychotropic drugs prescribed by a psychiatrist who knows something about addiction, and a program of recovery to change that focus and develop a new neural network. Whew. Okay. Now we're going to talk about what happens to you folks when one of your loved ones becomes ill. Because we change. Our focus changes. We become crisis-driven. We live with what I call Cuisinart head, with your head just spinning off your shoulder thinking, how do I fix this? How do I heal them? How do I solve this? Sometimes it's on CHOP and sometimes it's on Pulse, but it always seems to go. We engage in non-productive patterns of behavior, try to control absolutely the uncontrollable. There is a huge sibling impact to a substance use disorder that rarely gets discussed. I will tell you that. They feel like all the oxygen in the family is being used up by the person who is struggling. they feel like they have lost their peer. What happens when one sibling becomes very sick with a substance use disorder is that the other sibling aligns with the parents because they have to stay safe. If there isn't that situation, it's very often siblings lining up together, but they lose that sense when their loved one is struggling. What's happening to parents? We start adjusting. We adjust. We can adjust to almost anything. We adjust what's normal, acceptable, functioning, and the parameters of the relationship. And the best way I know how to describe this comes from the early 90s. Newsweek came out with an article that said, if you are a woman and you are single and you are over 30, your odds of finding a man were less than getting killed by a terrorist. It really was. It came out. The story does go somewhere. I was over 30, I was single, and I was visiting my brother, and he was having a heyday ribbing me about this article. And when I finished crying, we sat down to watch Saturday Night Live, and they, of course, had to do a riff on this article. They, of course, did. So they had a dating game of this beautiful woman picking from these 3 Saturday Night Live guys. I think it was John Belushi, and, picking their noses and scratching their bottoms and belching on the air. And the name of the dating game was, you've got to lower your standards. And I think that's what happens in family systems too. If we used to not allow swearing in our house, we're okay suddenly if we're not being called the fucking bitch. We change, we adjust. If we used to expect that they would set their own alarm clock, we start becoming the alarm clock. We adjust. And we engage in what I call protecting behavior. In the addiction industry and world, they talk about enabling. Anybody heard that expression? Somebody enabled somebody else to be addicted. I don't use that language because I feel like it's got my finger out wagging at somebody like they caused the problem. But what I do think happens is that we seek to protect them. But the way we're protecting them may well be protecting the disorder from treatment. Make sense? So we may be not raising an issue because we're trying to protect the relationship. We may be bailing them out continuously economically because we are worried about their ability to get credit later on. We may protect the illusion of the teen. They might be troubled, but we don't want the other parents in the community to know about it. We might be protecting our own addiction issue or the image of ourselves as parents. It's complicated. But we seek to protect one thing, which has a byproduct of allowing a substance use or mental health issue to be untreated. Because what we teach when we engage in this protecting behavior is that the teen may not be responsible at all for their own well-being, and they need to become responsible for their own well-being, that there are no consequences for choices, that happiness is in and of itself a viable goal, that pain and struggle are avoidable, that parents can and will handle all issues as they arise, and that we'll keep filling the gaps of functioning, even as the gaps grow wider. And then we get into over-functioning, right? So they're getting in a troubled zone. They stop setting their alarm clock. Who becomes the alarm clock? We do. We do. And the more we do, guess what? The less they do. And the less becomes the new normal through this adjustment process until a crisis emerges. Till we either get sick and tired of doing what we've been doing, or they get sicker and we can't overfunction anymore. So that was my son in the 2nd grade, and his teacher called me in, no, 3rd grade. Miss Kelly was 3rd grade, and she called me in and she said, "You are doing too much." She had the full finger wag. And I was like, "Yeah, I know, I teach this stuff." And she said, "No, really, you're doing too much. You're going through his backpack. You're sitting down with him. You're doing too much. He's never going to get it together." And I'm like, "He's only in the 3rd grade." She said, "This is when it begins." And I was like, whoa, okay. So I left fully resolved to not overfunction. And the next day, the very next day, we pull up in front of the school and my son says from the back seat, I forgot my sneakers and it's gym day. You need to go get them. I was like, uh-oh, here we are. Moment of truth. I had put the sneakers on top of his backpack, okay? I didn't put them in, but I hadn't put them away either. So I said, I can't go get your sneakers. And I'm not going to go get your sneakers. You'll make it through the day without them. Take off. He had moon boots on. It was a day like today. And he said, what do you mean? And I said, well, you can take off. No, I can't take off my boots. They won't let you walk around school in your socks. And I said, well, I guess you'll make it through the day. And he said, I am a klutz. I am so uncoordinated, and we are playing volleyball, and I'm wearing moon boots. I'm going to wind up bullied, and it's going to be your fault. And it was like, oh, wow, he's really good. And he was only in the 3rd grade. And I made it through the day. I didn't get his shoes for him. And all day, my stomach was in a knot. All day, I was waiting for the bad mommy police to call saying, your son is being bullied at school. He's out behind where the ruffians tackled him. All day. The end of the day comes, I hear clomp, clomp, clomp up the deck to the front door. I raced across the house. I didn't walk. I ran to greet him at the front door, opened up the door, said, how was your day? Fueled with guilt. And he said, fine, what's to eat? I learned something really valuable that day. Not only will he make it through the day, if I don't overfunction, that he made it through the day a heck of a lot better and I lost a day. But this picture came about 3 months later and I had to laugh out loud. He is much taller than anybody else in that front row. She put him there on purpose with the boots. I swear she did. And I thought, how often do you have photographic proof of not overfunctioning? I have proof of a negative. So the key is healthy boundaries. Healthy boundaries keep love in and chaos out. So what does that look like? You know you have to firm up your boundaries, and we'll talk about what that means in a second. When there's violence, undue stress, destruction of property, theft, bad influence upon people younger. The lying is making you crazy and you're treated with disrespect. That's when boundaries need to be set. And boundaries are not commands. They are not rules. Boundaries are statements of what you expect and what will happen if those expectations aren't met. If you drink and drive, you will no longer have access to my car. That's a boundary. There is no drinking and driving is not a boundary. That's a command. That's an order. It's a rule, but it is not a boundary. So when we're experiencing whether to set a boundary or to leap in, I want you to use these questions. Number 1, they call you up. They've gone off to college. They call you up. I have dirty clothes, right? That's my older son. First question, whose problem is it? The answer is theirs. How serious are the consequences? Not. Who grows if I solve the problem? If I get on the line and I locate the laundromat or I'm quite capable of doing that. And then texting him with the answer. What am I depriving him of if I leap into action like that? A sense of self, efficacy, that he can figure things out for himself, that I'm not Mama Google. So back to this, boundaries. I like to think of them as garden gates, not brick walls. When somebody is actively engaged in a productive or functional life, no matter how erratic they are because they're teenagers, boundaries are open. They have certain privileges. When they are active in disrespectful or dysfunctional behavior, the boundaries close. In the case of addiction, my friend Mary had a son with a heroin addiction, and he had overdosed one Christmas at their house, and they had to Narcan him and get to the hospital. And she made a declaration. She said, when you are active in your recovery, all the privileges of our family are open to you. You can come home for holidays, you can spend the night in our home, we can give you cash gifts at Christmas, we can go on family vacations. But when you're active in your disorder, all of those things are not available to you anymore. And so he came, a year goes past, he was active in his addiction, and he called up and he said, when's Christmas? What time should I be over? And she said, I'm sorry, I told you last year, you can't come home for Christmas this year if you're actively using. And he said, what? It's Christmas. And she said, I'm really sorry, I can't have you overdose again in front of my 14-year-old. I can't allow you to hijack the whole holiday again. And so she set a boundary, and she lived it, hard as that was. I probably never would have advocated working with her that she set that boundary, because I think it's probably the hardest one to live. But she said it. And so she said, I'll meet you for a meal. I'll bring you leftovers from Christmas dinner. I'll meet you. I want to see you, but you can't come to the house. So she met him, and she brought him whatever. But that was his last Christmas of using. He went to treatment and stayed clean, and that's about 8 years ago now. She didn't cause it or control it, but the pain of using, the consequences from the pain of using were outweighed, right? He wanted to be part of his family. And so the benefits of not using outweighed the benefits of using. When setting boundaries, we want to make them specific, reasonable, enforceable, and logically related to the goal. If you talk to me with disrespect, I will walk away. Is that specific? Yeah. Reasonable? I think so. Enforceable? Yes, because you can walk away. And logically related to the goal of not being talked to like a creep? Yes. Anger and resentment are clear signs that we need to evaluate our boundaries. And that's not just with our kids, that's with our spouses. When we start setting boundaries, we don't stop. Our spouses stop, like everybody wants us to change back. We stop being the people that they could predict when we start saying, no, and if you do that, I'm going to have to do blank. So, this concludes the didactic portion of our presentation. I love this cartoon with this little kid saying, Mama, can you carry this? As she's weighed down. I was like, yeah, that's what every mom feels like. So, question and answer. Thank you.